When women make change, they bring everybody else along. It's a very inclusive perspective women tend to have. So one of the solutions that it presented was to just put a large number of resources into a fund that would be managed or run with a specific focus on helping women get into the political arena, stay in the political arena, take care of them when they're attacked, give them the resources they need to succeed and thrive in those roles. And the answer to that resulted in the Colmena Fund.
Now the news, Bangladesh is on the boil again.
This is Colmena Fund.
Welcome back to Resist, Persist and Reimagine, the Colmena Fund podcast where we explore the voices, strategies and stories behind diverse women's political leadership across the Global South. Today we are honored to welcome Laleh Ispahani to the podcast.
My name is Laleh Ispahani. I'm currently at the Open Society Foundations, where I'm a managing director of programs.
Laleh has spent her career working to build a vibrant, accountable democracy. As managing director of programs at the Open Society Foundations, she designs, launches, and oversees efforts to elevate democratic values, drive political reform, shape inclusive policy, and promote racial justice in the United States and beyond. Her leadership spans philanthropy, advocacy, and legal strategy, from her years at the American Civil Liberties Union to building large-scale movements for justice at Open Society. Her commitment is personal too. As a first-generation Muslim immigrant who grew up in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Iran, she understands firsthand how fragile democracy can be and how urgently we must fight to make it resilient, inclusive, and real. Today, she brings that global lived perspective to her work and to this conversation about the challenges and possibilities of democratic renewal. Let's dive in.
So I grew up through war, revolution, martial law. I saw the hanging of a democratically elected president by an army general. So I did not experience a lot of stability in my childhood. And those events were very influential in my thinking as I grew up and went through college and then through a legal education. It wasn't clear to me what I could do and how much power I would have to make change, given I was one person from countries with very difficult histories. And as it happens, I ended up staying in the United States after completing a legal education here, and for a few years tried to figure out what made sense, whether I would use the law as an instrument of social change or use another avenue. In the end, I found myself at the American Civil Liberties Union, also known as the ACLU, which was my first home. And I was an advocate there on a number of racial justice and human rights issues. And one of the first complex things I worked on there was how do you apply the international human rights framework to U.S. domestic social justice problems? Because in fact, the international human rights framework is much more expansive and generous, but the United States has never signed any of these treaties, so they are not self-executing. We have gone a small ways toward it, but we have not given them the force of law in this country. So that was the beginning of my sort of engagement and understanding of how many unique issues there are in the U.S. that are quite complicated, regressive, issues of anti-blackness, issues of over-incarceration, issues of impunity around drugs, certainly issues around gender.
Resist, persist, and reimagine. All of these challenges are intensifying as democracies weaken and face growing threats around the world. In this context, women's rights and feminist movements are especially vulnerable, often becoming the first political targets in the face of rising authoritarianism.
This is a moment of a lot of contraction, breakage, rupture. But whenever you have a moment of contraction, breakage, rupture, you also have a moment of opportunity. You have to jump into that breach. And so this is actually a moment to be incredibly active, incredibly vigorous, and then put at the center of the debate the things that are important. There is no doubt that the progress women have made over the years cannot be eroded in this process of going forward, in the process of rebirth. So it has to remain on the agenda. It cannot be the third thing on the agenda. It really cannot. I think we just have to use this moment as an opportunity to put core things, sustainability of the planet, women, and equity around gender, economic issues. We have to put those really at the center of this debate and brook no dissent on those things. We have to be aligned that those are very core issues, and there's no one without the other. So to me, that's really the answer. And the energy that civil society brings to this, and elected officials who are interested in us moving forward, not backward, pulling them all together and really harnessing it is one of the things women know how to do best, is to collaborate, coordinate, strategize together, work transnationally. That might be new to some. In the US, it's certainly new, but people are finding partners. Open Society has been doing this for the last year, making sure we're having transnational conversation with people who have more history with autocracies, learning from them. And I think similarly, the women's movement, that has been having a more collective conversation for a longer time. And now we just have to include young women in it, younger leaders in it, and just really have it all add up to one line strategy, which I do think only women really can do and know how to do, because bringing everyone to a table is a strength women have.
This is Colmena Fund.
Before we move forward with our guest interview, we want to highlight a key insight of our steering committee member and senior advisor at the Open Society Foundation's Sumaya Islam. In the foreword of the report Beyond Gender Parity, authored by Panorama Strategy, she reminds us that when women with a progressive agenda lead, all of society benefits. Women's equal participation and leadership in political and public life are essential to thwarting the rise of authoritarianism across the globe. Yet data show that women are underrepresented at all levels of decision-making worldwide, and that achieving gender parity in political life is far off. In response, the Open Society Foundations created the Women's Political Leadership Fund in 2023, which later evolved into the Colmena Fund for Women's Political Power. Our guest, Laleh Ispahani, shares more about OSF's vision for political philanthropy.
I think Open Society is unique among even philanthropies because it is a political philanthropy. And by that, I don't mean we take a side in politics. It's a nonpartisan philanthropy, but it assumes an understanding of the political context as important in resolving any issues of socio-economic progress. You cannot ignore the political environment and context. So to us, that's a given. What that also means is working sometimes in partnership with elected leaders as part of the path forward. You work with activists, you work with parliamentarians. It's all part of a puzzle that gets you to change. And we started to then see how is it that we can potentially support people who are elected into office in a way that connects them better to advocates, civil society advocates, and to philanthropies and any other stakeholders, but really puts us all together and moves us all toward change in the same direction. We certainly noticed as we started to do that work that women elected to offices, local offices, in states, in cities, district attorneys, women who enforce the law or who defend the law, it was a much harder job for them, number one, to get elected, and number two, when they're in office, to stay in office. They are much more frequently the targets of harassment, intimidation, and attacks when they are prosecuting cases or defending cases. And so we found that there's a lot more work to do, focusing specifically on women candidates for office and women in office. And so that has been a piece of our work. Another piece has actually been to support people like attorneys general and even find ways to work with governors and governors associations, especially now when the threats are what they are, because having them collaborate is the counterpoint, it's the counterforce to a federal administration that is very hostile. So supporting state leaders, whether they are attorneys general in their states, the highest elected law enforcement officer, or whether it is the governor of a state with significant executive authority, we're helping them collaborate with one another on key issues and on pushing back against our current administration when it crosses a line.
Resist, persist, and reimagine. As the report Beyond Gender Parity explains, it is crucial to identify the key areas to prioritize for funding women's political leadership, as well as to determine the most effective approaches to allocate resources within those areas. By strategically directing resources to where they can have the greatest impact, funders can narrow the gap between intention and action, advancing the field of women's political leadership and fostering meaningful progress. This idea is at the heart of the Colmena Fund's mission: to bring critical funding and infrastructure to strengthen feminist and democratic women's leadership, particularly for women from marginalized backgrounds across the global south. Our guest, Laleh Ispahani, now shares more about why focusing on this group and geography is essential for building lasting change.
We had been learning for quite a while from our work across the globe that these issues I'm talking about are not just in any one geography. Having women enter the political arena is a big calculation for women. It's calculating the risk involved to their families, to their children, to their safety. It's calculating a number of things. And so that we started having conversations within the Open Society Foundations and understood that women in multiple geographies across in very different kinds of societies were all facing barriers in this sense. Even if it was in countries with relatively higher representation of women in elected offices, the problems were still fairly common. The problems of safety, of security, of supports and resources to do their jobs when there had never been a woman in that particular office, for example, before. So one of the thoughts we had was, how do we bring this together? How do we figure out how do we support women globally who are trying to do things differently in their societies? Because again, as we know, when women make change, they bring everybody else along. It's a very inclusive perspective women tend to have. So one of the solutions that it presented was to just put a large number of resources into a fund that would be managed or run with a specific focus on helping women get into the political arena, stay in the political arena, take care of them when they're attacked, give them the resources they need to succeed and thrive in those roles. And the answer to that, it resulted in the Colmena Fund. It didn't start in, but it has resulted in that. And we're delighted to see where it's come and it's how much hope it's giving women and how inspiring it can be if it continues on the path it's on.
This is Colmena Fund.
As we wrap up this episode, we asked our guests, how do these efforts contribute to reimagining democracies globally, ensuring no one is left out of the conversation or the decision-making table? Here's what she had to say.
That's actually a critical question today, is how we define democracy, and we meaning anybody really, because for a long time the notion had been any place with a free and fair election was a democracy. But in fact now we know you can have an election, even potentially a free and fair one by most accounts, and that could be an autocracy or result in an autocracy. So we have elected autocracies now. You can discuss what the exact group is, but we know lots of people who want to have total power in a country are still running in elections and find their way to power through a system of elections. Democracy needs redefinition and really must be defined with some substantive content. If you asked me, I think that would have to have gender equity at its core. It would have to have economic justice at its core. It would have to have an inclusion of historically marginalized people in whichever place we're talking about. So I think it's giving substantive meaning to democracy beyond elections that gets you to a full definition of democracy. And I think, again, the struggles, transnational struggles around democracy, really, this is one of the key threads, the key pressure points we're all dealing with, is how to define democracy in the 21st century that gives it real meaning and makes it desirable to people at large.
Resist, persist, and reimagine. Thank you for being with us today. Building resilient, inclusive democracies is not the work of one voice. It's a collective effort. If today's conversation resonated with you, please subscribe, share, leave a review, or send it to someone who needs to hear it. Join our Colmena Hive and stand with women leaders and diverse identities who are reimagining political power across the Global South. You can learn more about our work at the Colmena Fund by visiting our website or following us on social media. Until next time.
Now the news, Bangladesh is on the boil again.
This is Colmena Fund.